March 15, 2024. Los Angeles International Airport. A 42-year-old flight attendant with 19 years of perfect service was dragged off his own aircraft in handcuffs while blood ran down his face. His crime? Enforcing federal safety regulations. His mistake? Being black while doing it. Before you scroll away, ask yourself this. Would you have your phone out filming, or would you look away like most people did? Drop a comment. I want to know. The alarm clock in the small Queens apartment never made it past the first beep. James Thomas had spent 19 years waking before the sound finished, muscle memory from too many 4:30 call times. His hand found the button in darkness while his eyes stayed closed for 3 more seconds, savoring the last moment of stillness before the day began. 5:30 in the morning. The radiator clanked against March cold. Street noise from Roosevelt Avenue filtered through thin windows, early delivery trucks, the M60 bus wheezing past, someone's car alarm dying mid-wail. This was home, had been for 11 years. 2 bedrooms, rent-controlled, 3rd-floor walk-up. The building superintendent knew his schedule, left packages outside his door instead of making him trek downstairs during the narrow windows between flights. James sat up. His knees protested. 42 years, 19 of them walking airplane aisles, compression stockings barely keeping the varicose veins at bay. He'd watched younger flight attendants come and go, their backs straight, their smiles effortless. His smile was effortless too, but it cost something now. Small invisible tax paid every time someone asked for a pillow, for water, for the bathroom occupied sign to somehow unseat itself faster. Bathroom. He avoided the mirror while brushing his teeth, a habit formed over years of early flights when seeing your own exhaustion made it harder to pretend otherwise. The shower ran hot. One luxury he permitted himself, building maintenance be damned. Steam filled the small space. He stood under the spray and let it unknot the tension between his shoulders, that permanent tightness from reaching overhead bins thousands of times. By 5:55 he was in the kitchen, coffee brewing in the ancient Mr. Coffee machine his daughter had tried to replace 3 Christmases running. He kept refusing. The thing worked. Why fix what wasn't broken? The smell of cheap supermarket grounds filled the apartment, bitter and familiar, better than any alarm. His uniform hung on the bathroom door where he'd placed it the night before. White shirt, crisp from the laundromat's industrial press, navy vest with the Atlantic Airways logo embroidered over the heart. Black slacks with a crease sharp enough to cut. Wings pin on the vest's left lapel. 19 years of service, though the company had stopped giving pins past 15. He'd had to special order this one himself, pay out of pocket, because HR said the recognition program had been streamlined. The vest fit tighter than it used to. Not much. Just enough that he'd stopped eating bread 6 months ago, started walking the extra 2 stops to the subway instead of catching it at the corner. Vanity had nothing to do with it. A 42-year-old black flight attendant couldn't afford to give passengers reasons to complain. Too heavy meant lazy. Too thin meant sickly. The margins were narrow and getting narrower. He poured coffee into a travel mug, added 2 sugars, no cream. Opened his laptop on the kitchen counter while he drank. The Atlantic Airways employee portal loaded slowly, his building's Wi-Fi fighting its usual morning battle with every apartment streaming, scrolling, downloading at once. The screen refreshed. There it was. Retirement account balance, $287,450.23. James stared at the number the way he did every morning, a private ritual nobody knew about. Not even Michelle. Especially not Michelle. $287,000. 19 years of $500 monthly contributions, the company match making it closer to $800. Compound interest doing its slow patient work while he served ginger ale and collected trash at 35,000 feet. This number was Michelle's nursing school. Her student loans already paid off. $56,000 in 4 years. Every overtime shift, every holiday worked, every time he said yes when they called asking him to cover someone's sick day. This number was his retirement in 11 years when he hit the mandatory age limit, when his back would finally get to stop bending, his feet finally get to stay flat. This number was his father's legacy, though he'd never told the accountants that when they asked about beneficiary designations. His phone buzzed. FaceTime from Chicago. Michelle's face filled the screen, pixelated for a moment before the connection steadied. She was at her desk in the studio apartment he helped her rent, medical textbooks stacked like apartment buildings around her laptop, highlighters lined up with military precision. "Dad, you're up. Always. You should be asleep. Midterm tomorrow. Anatomy." She held up a flashcard showing something bloody and complicated. "Can you name this vessel?" "I can name the vessels I serve beverages in. That's where my expertise ends." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. 20 years old and already carrying weight she shouldn't have to carry. He saw it in the way her shoulders curved forward, the dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. "Dad, I checked the bursar. Spring tuition posts Friday." "I know. It's $8,200. I can defer—" "Michelle, I can work more shifts at the hospital. They're always asking for CNAs." "Michelle." His voice firmed up, the same tone he used when passengers tried to stand during turbulence. "I've got it." Silence. She looked at him through the screen, and he looked back, and in that moment they both knew what they weren't saying. That $8,200 was 3 months of his salary. That he'd need to pick up extra flights, work the red-eyes nobody wanted, trade his days off for the premium pay that came with last-minute schedule changes. That's a lot of money. It's an investment. You're going to be a nurse. You're going to help people. That's worth it. "But what about you? When do you get to—" "I'm fine. You're always fine, even when you're not." He didn't answer that. Couldn't. She was right, and they both knew it. Michelle's expression shifted, something softer moving across her face. "You're working today?" "Flight 227, JFK to LAX. "First class?" "Yeah." "Good. Those tips will help." He didn't tell her that first-class passengers rarely tipped, that the wealthier they were, the less they saw him as a person who might appreciate $5. Didn't tell her that he'd learned to smile through their demands and their dismissals and their casual cruelty because that's what the job required. She had enough to worry about without carrying his burdens too. "When's your midterm?" 2 p.m. "You're going to crush it." "I hope so. This professor doesn't curve." "You don't need a curve. You're brilliant." She rolled her eyes, but he saw the smile she was trying to hide. "Okay, Dad. Go to work. Save the world at 35,000 feet. Love you, baby. Love you more." The screen went dark. He was alone again in his kitchen with cold coffee and a retirement account that was and wasn't enough, depending on which crisis arrived first. 6:15. He closed the laptop, rinsed his mug, checked his bag one final time. Passport, even though it was domestic, habit from international routes he'd worked years ago. Phone charger, Advil for the headache that would arrive around hour 3 of the flight. Protein bars because crew meals had gotten smaller and sadder as profit margins got tighter and shareholders got hungrier. The photo on his refrigerator caught his eye as he grabbed his keys. Himself at 23, fresh-faced and impossibly young, standing next to Captain William Thomas in front of a Boeing 737. Both of them in uniform, both of them grinning. The date scrawled on the back in his father's handwriting. June 1995, the month James had graduated from flight attendant training. The month his father had told him he was proud. William Thomas had been one of 3 black pilots who'd founded Atlantic Airways in 1968 when the major carriers wouldn't hire them. He'd flown until mandatory retirement at 60, then died 5 years later, his heart giving out the same year the company he'd built went public and made millionaires out of shareholders who'd never sat in a cockpit. The will had been simple: 18% of Atlantic Airways to his only son. The shares had been worth $40 million in 2015 when William died. They were worth $340 million now, give or take the daily fluctuations of an airline stock that treated turbulence as metaphor. James had never told anyone, not Michelle, not the few friends who'd stuck around through the years. Not the union reps who fought for better pay while he sat in the back of the meetings and kept his mouth shut. He'd kept it secret because the moment people knew he was rich, they'd stop seeing him as a flight attendant. They'd see money, they'd see privilege, they'd see everything except the truth. The truth was simple. He wanted to earn respect, not inherit it. So he put on his vest with its 19-year pin, and he rode the M60 to the airport, and he worked the galley, and he smiled through the casual racism and the wandering hands and the passengers who snapped fingers instead of using call buttons. He did it because his father had taught him that dignity came from work, not wealth. That character was built in the doing, not the having. He locked his apartment door and started down the stairs, his rolling suitcase thumping against each step. Mrs. Kowalski from 2B was checking her mail, 70-something and unstoppable, the kind of New Yorker who'd outlive the cockroaches. "Early flight, James?" "Always. You work too hard. Keeps me young," she laughed, the sound echoing in the narrow hallway. "Young? Look at you, still lying to old ladies." He grinned and kept moving. Outside, March cold hit his face. Not quite winter, but not yet spring. The sky that particular gray that meant rain later. Roosevelt Avenue was already awake, bodegas rolling up their gates, the halal cart on the corner sending up steam from its griddle, the smell of sausage and eggs mixing with bus exhaust and someone's cigarette smoke. The M60 pulled up right as he reached the stop. Small miracle. He climbed aboard, tapped his Metro card, found a seat near the back. The bus was half full with airport workers like him, TSA agents in their blue uniforms, baggage handlers with their reflective vests, gate agents clutching coffee cups like life preservers. Nobody talked. This was the silent fellowship of people who worked while others slept, who made their living in the margins between midnight and dawn, who knew the city best in its quietest hours. The ride to LaGuardia took 40 minutes, then the air train to JFK, another 30. He used the time to scroll his phone, checking the news, the weather in Los Angeles, the crew message board where flight attendants traded shifts and complained about management with varying degrees of professionalism. One message caught his eye. Posted 3 hours ago by someone with the username Sky High. Truth. Reminder that today marks 19 years since the last time Atlantic hired a black pilot. 19 years. But sure, tell me again how we don't have a diversity problem. The comments were predictable. Half the people calling it out, half making excuses, a few brave souls saying quiet parts loud. Maybe they're just not qualified. Stop making everything about race. I'm tired of this victim mentality. James closed the app. He'd learned years ago that fighting in comment sections was like trying to bail out the ocean with a teaspoon. Some battles couldn't be won with words. Terminal 4 loomed ahead, its glass facade catching weak morning light. He swiped through security with his crew badge, bypassed the civilian lines, the TSA agent barely glancing at his face before waving him through. The terminal itself was waking up, gate agents powering on their computers, early passengers already camping at their gates despite boarding being hours away. The crew room was on the second floor, tucked behind the Admirals Club where the real money spent its layovers. He keyed in the code, changed monthly, another security theater nobody questioned, and pushed through the door. 4 flight attendants were already there. He recognized 3 of them from previous flights, the 4th a new face that meant either recent hire or transfer from another base. Linda Garcia stood at the front counter, reviewing paperwork with the intensity of someone who'd turned rule-following into personality. 48 years old. Chief flight attendant, 22 years with Atlantic. Linda ran the first-class cabin with efficiency that bordered on tyranny, the kind of person who believed proper service meant proper hierarchy, and proper hierarchy meant knowing your place. She looked up when James entered. "Thomas." "Morning, Linda. You're on 227 today, first class." "I know, I checked the roster." She paused, pen hovering over her clipboard. Her eyes did that thing they always did, that quick assessment that took in his face, his uniform, his presence, and found something wanting. He'd never been able to identify exactly what she was looking for, only that he consistently failed to provide it. First class is demanding. I've worked first class 200 times. I know, but today we have a VIP, Bradford Holdings executive's daughter. Father's negotiating a major investment, $340 million. The irony of that number wasn't lost on him. So I need you to be on top of things. Every word was professionally neutral. Every word carried subtext sharp enough to draw blood. I understand. Do you? Because one complaint from her and... She didn't finish, didn't need to. Michael Harris sat in the corner, 28 years old, 2 years with the company, the kind of eager competence that reminded James of himself at that age. Michael looked up from his phone, caught James's eye, his expression uncomfortable in the way of people witnessing something they couldn't name but knew wasn't right. Linda kept talking. Captain Miller is deadheading in 2C. He'll be observing. Make sure everything is perfect. Captain Donald Miller, 62 years old. Check captain, the kind of pilot who treated the cockpit like a throne and everyone else like subjects. James had flown with him twice, both times emerging from the experience with the distinct impression that Miller believed the world had gone to hell the moment it stopped being exclusively white and male. Understood. Good. Boarding starts in 50 minutes. Make sure the galley is stocked. I want fresh flowers in first class, not those wilted carnations they tried to pass off yesterday, and double-check the champagne, Dom Perignon, not the cheaper stuff. We only stock Dom in first class. Linda's smile was thin. Just make sure. She walked away, clipboard clutched to her chest like armor. The other flight attendants scattered to their pre-flight routines. Michael approached, voice low. Hey, that was... It's fine. No, it's not. She doesn't talk to me like that. James looked at him, this young white flight attendant with good intentions and zero understanding of how exhausting it was to explain the obvious. Michael, I've been doing this 19 years. I know what I'm doing. I know you do. That's why it's messed up that I need to check my galley. He moved past Michael before the conversation could continue, before kindness could crack the shell he needed to maintain to get through the day. Michael meant well. They always meant well. But meaning well didn't change anything when the system was designed to make meaning irrelevant. The galley prep took 30 minutes. He counted champagne bottles, checked expiration dates on the small amenity kits first-class passengers expected, made sure the coffee was ground fresh, and the tea selection included the weird organic brands that cost more per ounce than his hourly wage. Every task performed with the precision of ritual, muscle memory taking over while his mind wandered. Flight 227, JFK to LAX. 5 hours 40 minutes of airtime. Wheels up at 10:15, wheels down at 1:47 Pacific. He'd worked this route 60 times, knew every mile of it, could predict turbulence patterns over Kansas, knew that passengers always wanted extra ice during the climb and extra blankets during the descent. What nobody knew was that he owned more of this airline than any of them would earn in 3 lifetimes. Boarding began at 9:30. The first-class passengers arrived in their predictable sequence. Business travelers moving with practiced efficiency, wealthy tourists moving with entitled confusion, the occasional family burning miles for an upgrade, their kids' eyes wide at the big seats and the real glassware. He stood at the entrance with his smile ready, his posture perfect, his voice calibrated to the exact frequency of professional warmth that said, "Welcome without promising friendship." "Good morning, sir. Welcome aboard." "Morning, ma'am. Can I help with your bag?" "Right this way. You're in seat 3A. Then she arrived. Ashley Rodriguez, 24 years old, ears. Designer everything. Bag, shoes, sunglasses that cost more than his monthly rent. She moved through the jetway with the particular grace of someone who'd never had to wonder if they belonged anywhere, followed by 2 assistants carrying bags and a man in an expensive suit who looked like he wished he were anywhere else. The gate agent's voice had gone up half an octave. "Miss Rodriguez, welcome. Let me get you settled. I'm already in first." Ashley didn't look up from her phone, thumbs moving in that rapid-fire way that suggested she was conducting 3 conversations simultaneously, none of them in person. "Of course, but we can move you to 1A if you prefer?" "Sure, whatever." James watched the interaction, filed it away. The gate agent's eagerness, Ashley's indifference, the way power manifested in small moments of people bending themselves around someone else's orbit. Ashley walked past him without acknowledgement. He was furniture. Furniture with wings and a smile, but furniture nonetheless. She settled into 1A, the assistants hovering, the suited man, Stephen Clark according to the manifest, taking 1C. James gave them 90 seconds to get situated before approaching. "Good morning, Miss Rodriguez. Can I take your coat?" She looked up. 3 seconds of assessment that felt like 30. Her eyes moved from his face to his name tag to his hands to his shoes and back to his face, the kind of once-over that left residue. "No." "Can I get you a pre-departure beverage?" "Champagne. Dom Perignon." "Of course. We'll be serving once everyone's—" "Now." The word hung in the air between them. Not a request. A test. He'd seen this before, this particular brand of power play that had nothing to do with thirst and everything to do with watching someone jump. "We're still boarding, ma'am. I can bring it once we're ready for pushback." "Do you not understand the word now?" Silence. The kind that makes everyone in a 10-foot radius suddenly very interested in their seatbelts. Captain Miller in 2C lowered his newspaper just enough to watch over the top of it. Judge Margaret Anderson in 3B kept reading her case files, but her pen stopped moving. Kenneth and Brenda Jackson in 4A and 4B looked at each other with the expression of people who'd been married long enough to communicate entire conversations without speaking. James kept his voice level, professional, warm as he could manage while swallowing his pride. "I'll get that for you." He walked to the galley. Michael was there, stocking napkins. "Did she just—" "Yeah. I know." James pulled a champagne flute from the rack, opened the Dom Perignon that was indeed the only champagne they stocked in first class because Linda's paranoia had foundation in past disasters, poured exactly 4 ounces the way the manual specified. Returned to 1A with the glass on a small tray, his smile restored to factory settings. "Your champagne, Miss Rodriguez." She took it without looking at him, sipped, set it down. "This glass has water spots." He looked at the glass. It was spotless. He'd checked it himself, held it up to the galley light to make sure. "I apologize. Let me get you another one." Back to the galley, Michael watching. "The glass was fine." "I know." New glass, same champagne, same approach, same smile. Ashley didn't even sip this time. "This champagne is warm." The champagne had been chilled to exactly 45 degrees. He'd checked the thermometer. He'd done this job for 19 years, and he knew what temperature champagne was supposed to be. "Ma'am, it's been chilled to regulation temperature, but if you'd prefer it colder—" "Are you arguing with me about temperature?" Stephen Clark in 1C shifted uncomfortably. "Ashley, it's fine." "Stephen, stay out of this." James felt the familiar tightness in his chest, that sensation of walls closing in while you had to keep smiling, keep breathing, keep pretending this was normal customer service and not something sharper and meaner. "I'm not arguing, ma'am. I'm just trying to understand your preference so I can—" "Get me a cold one." He did. 3rd glass, fresh bottle from the back of the refrigerator where it was coldest, poured with the bottle tilted at exactly the right angle to minimize bubbles, returned with his smile intact and his dignity negotiable. Ashley sipped, said nothing, didn't say thank you. The glass sat on her tray table, condensation forming, proof that it was cold enough, that it had always been cold enough. Boarding continued. More passengers, more smiles, more bags lifted into overhead bins that made his shoulders scream. Christopher Lee in 1B, laptop already open, fingers moving across the keyboard with the speed of someone on deadline. He glanced up when James passed, made eye contact, nodded. Professional acknowledgement, nothing more. 10:15. The main cabin door closed. Gate agent made the final count announcement. Captain Richard Gonzalez's voice came over the PA, smooth and practiced. "Good morning, folks. This is Captain Gonzalez. Welcome aboard Flight 227 with service to Los Angeles. Flight time today is 5 hours 40 minutes. Weather in LA is beautiful, 72 degrees and sunny. We're currently number 4 for departure, so we should be in the air in about 15 minutes. Flight attendants, prepare for departure." James stood at the front of first class, ready to demonstrate the safety procedures he'd demonstrated 4,000 times. He waited for the cabin to settle, for conversations to pause, for attention to drift his direction. Ashley's voice cut through the quiet. "Can you keep it down? I'm on a call." He looked at her. She had her phone to her ear, speaking to someone with the kind of aggressive intimacy that suggested father, boyfriend, or business partner who'd crossed into one of those categories. "Ma'am, FAA regulations require all passengers to pay attention to the safety demonstration. I've seen the safety thing 100 times. That may be true, but I need to ask you to end your call for the next few minutes." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and her eyes were cold in the way that comes from never having been told no by someone who mattered. "Are we going to have a problem? I'm just asking for a few minutes of your attention. It's for the safety of everyone on board." Ashley stared at him. 4 seconds. 5. 6. Then she made a show of ending her call, the sigh so theatrical it could have played Broadway, the eye roll visible from the back of the cabin. "Fine. Happy now?" James didn't answer. He began the safety demonstration, his hands moving through the familiar motions while his mind cataloged everything that had just happened and everything that was about to happen, because he knew with the certainty of 19 years' experience that this flight was nowhere near finished testing him. The plane pushed back from the gate, taxied to the runway, took off into gray March sky over Queens, climbing through clouds that were and weren't like the ones he'd grown up under, banking west toward a future nobody in that cabin could predict. What James didn't know as the wheels left the ground was that in 3 hours and 12 minutes, Ashley Rodriguez would throw champagne in his face. That in 3 hours and 17 minutes she would shove him into a galley wall hard enough to leave bruises. That in 3 hours and 53 minutes he would be handcuffed and bleeding, dragged down the aisle in front of 40 witnesses who would either film or look away. But either way, remember. What nobody in that cabin knew was that the man serving them champagne owned 18% of the company. That the retirement account on his phone represented more than money, represented generations of struggle and sacrifice and the quiet dignity of showing up every day to a job that tried to make you small. That by the time this flight landed, 6 lives would be destroyed, an entire airline would be grounded, and the trajectory of American aviation would change forever. But right now, at 10:27 a.m. Eastern Time, 32,000 feet over Pennsylvania, James Thomas was just a flight attendant doing his job, serving drinks, collecting trash, smiling through the small cruelties that passengers mistook for their right. And somewhere in the back of his mind, in a place he rarely let himself examine, he wondered how much longer he could keep doing this, how much longer anyone could. The question would be answered before the day was over, in ways none of them were prepared for. The seatbelt sign chimed off at 35,000 feet. James unbuckled from the jump seat and stood, his knees protesting the angle they'd been locked in during climb. First-class service would begin now. Drinks, then meal orders, then the long stretch of maintaining an atmosphere of luxury for people who measured their worth in how invisible the staff remained. Ashley pressed the call button before he'd taken 3 steps. He arrived at 1A with his professional mask firmly in place, the micro-adjustments to posture and expression that came from years of managing other people's comfort at the expense of his own. "Yes, Miss Rodriguez? I want the salmon." "Excellent choice. And for your side?" "No. I want your salmon." He blinked. Once. Processed what she'd just said, and the deliberate emphasis on the possessive. "I'm sorry, ma'am?" "The crew meals. I want what you eat." The request landed in his chest like a stone. Crew meals were prepackaged affairs, nothing like the plated service first class received, designed for efficiency and cost savings rather than enjoyment. They came in foil containers, reheated in the same convection ovens but portioned smaller, cheaper cuts of protein, vegetables that had seen better days before being frozen and shipped in bulk. Our crew meals are different from passenger service. The first-class salmon is, "I know what I want." Stephen Clark shifted in 1C, his discomfort visible in the way his shoulders drew up, his hands fidgeting with his phone. "Ashley, just order from the menu." "Stephen, I said I know what I want." The words hung between them, weighted with something beyond food preference. This wasn't about salmon. This was about watching someone jump when commanded, about power expressed in the smallest possible gesture because the small gestures were the ones that reminded everyone involved exactly where the lines were drawn. James felt the familiar calculation running in his head. He could refuse, should refuse. The crew meals were allocated for crew, they didn't have extras, and giving Ashley his meal meant he'd be eating pretzels from the snack box for the next 4 hours. But refusing meant escalation, meant Ashley would complain to Linda, meant Linda would make his life harder for creating a problem with a VIP passenger whose father was negotiating $340 million. He walked to the galley. Michael looked up from the meal cart he was organizing for coach service. "Everything okay?" "She wants crew salmon." "We don't have extra—" "I know." Michael's face shifted through several expressions before landing on frustrated resignation. "You're giving her yours." "Yeah. That's not right." James pulled his meal from the crew storage, the foil container still cool to the touch, salmon that would reheat into something vaguely edible but nothing approaching the quality first-class passengers paid thousands for. "I need you to cover galley for a minute." "James." But he was already plating the crew salmon on first-class china, arranging it with the garnish meant for passenger service, making the inferior product look as presentable as possible because that's what the job required. His stomach growled in preemptive protest. He returned to 1A and placed the plate in front of Ashley. She glanced at it, her expression unreadable. "This looks disgusting." Heat rose in his chest, the kind that came before anger, if you let it, but he'd learned long ago how to strangle anger before it reached his face. "You asked for the crew meal, ma'am. If you'd prefer the first-class salmon, just bring me the chicken." He removed the plate, returned to galley, plated the chicken, brought it back. Ashley ate 3 bites and pushed the tray away. "I'm done." "Can I get you anything else?" "Another champagne." 4th glass of the flight. He poured it, served it, retreated before she could find something else wrong. The galley felt smaller than usual, the walls pressing in, Michael's presence both comfort and witness to the slow erosion of his dignity. "You should report this." "Report what? That a passenger changed her mind about her meal?" "You know it's more than that." James looked at Michael, 28 years old and still believing the system worked if you just followed the right channels, filled out the right forms, trusted that justice existed somewhere up the chain of command. He'd believed that too once, 19 years ago when the world seemed simpler and fairness felt possible. "I have to finish service." He moved through the cabin with mechanical efficiency. Judge Anderson requested ginger ale, and when he brought it she looked at him with eyes that had spent decades reading people in courtrooms, seeing through performances to the truth underneath. "Thank you, James." She'd remembered his name from the earlier exchange, or read it off his name tag, and the small acknowledgement felt like water in desert country. He nodded and moved on. Kenneth and Brenda Jackson wanted coffee and orange juice, and Kenneth said please and thank you with the intentionality of someone who'd been raised to believe manners mattered. Brenda touched his arm lightly when he delivered their drinks. "You're doing great, sweetheart." The endearment shouldn't have meant anything. She was 64 years old, had probably called 1,000 service workers sweetheart in her life, but it landed somewhere tender, reminded him that not everyone in this cabin saw him as furniture with a pulse. Captain Miller in 2C wanted coffee. Black. He didn't look up from his newspaper when James delivered it, didn't acknowledge his presence beyond the slight shift that allowed James to place the cup on the tray table. The newspaper was Wall Street Journal, the fold precise, the reading posture of a man who'd spent decades believing his authority extended beyond the cockpit into every space his body occupied. Christopher Lee in 1B was the interesting one. Mid-40s, laptop open to what looked like a news article in draft form, fingers flying across keys with the rapid-fire precision of someone on deadline. He glanced up when James approached. "Coffee, please. Black, 2 sugars." "Of course." When James returned with the coffee, Christopher was watching Ashley with an expression that suggested calculation, observation, the particular attention of someone whose job involved documenting human behavior. His laptop screen was angled away, but James caught fragments as he set down the cup. Pattern of entitlement. Pattern of service industry workers. Wealth disparity. A journalist. Had to be. The question was whether he was writing about aviation or something broader, and whether the something broader included the small drama unfolding in row 1. The meal service stretched into its second hour. James worked with the efficiency of muscle memory, his body performing tasks his mind had catalogued years ago, leaving his consciousness free to drift. He thought about Michelle's midterm, hoped she'd slept at least a few hours, knew she probably hadn't. Thought about his retirement account and whether $287,000 was enough to cushion against the disasters that kept him awake at 3 a.m., medical emergencies, layoffs, the slow, inevitable decay of a body that had spent 2 decades bending to other people's comfort. Thought about his father in that photograph on the refrigerator, young and alive and believing that founding an airline meant building something that would outlast the racism that had tried to keep him grounded. William Thomas had been wrong about that, or maybe just optimistic, believing that ownership and excellence would eventually overcome the small daily cruelties that reminded you the world still measured your worth by your skin. Ashley pressed the call button again. 47 minutes since the last summons. James glanced at his watch. 12:18 p.m. Eastern. They were somewhere over Indiana, 2 hours into the flight with 3 hours 40 to go. "Yes, Miss Rodriguez?" "It's cold in here." The cabin temperature was 72 degrees, the standard maintained for passenger comfort across thousands of flights, the result of careful calibration between too hot and too cold that satisfied most people most of the time. "I can adjust your air vent. I want the cabin temperature changed." "Ma'am, we maintain 72 degrees for all passengers. If you'd like more warmth, I can get you a blanket." "Are you telling me you can't change it?" Stephen stirred in 1C, his voice quiet. "Ashley, just use the blanket." "Stephen, I don't want a blanket. I want it warmer." James kept his breathing steady. "I'll speak to the captain about the temperature." He walked to the cockpit, knocked 3 times in the pattern that signaled crew requesting entry. The lock clicked. Captain Richard Gonzalez glanced back from the left seat. "Yeah?" "Passenger in 1A requesting cabin temperature increase." Richard's co-pilot, a younger man James didn't recognize, suppressed a smile. Richard himself just shook his head. "Tell her we're at standard. She can use a blanket." "Copy that." James returned to 1A with the blanket already in hand, soft fleece in Atlantic's navy blue, the logo embroidered in silver thread. "Captain says we're at standard temperature for passenger comfort. I have a blanket if you'd like." "So you're saying no?" The words landed like an accusation. Around them, the cabin had gone quiet in that particular way that meant people were pretending not to listen while hanging on every syllable. "I'm saying we maintain the same temperature for all passengers, but I can make you more comfortable with—" "I don't want a blanket. Why is this so hard?" Judge Anderson in 3B set down her pen. Kenneth Jackson stopped mid-sip of his coffee. Christopher Lee's fingers paused on his keyboard. "I apologize for any inconvenience. Is there anything else I can—" "Yes, I want a different flight attendant." The sentence detonated in the small space of first class. Not loud. Didn't need to be. The words themselves carried enough force. "I'm the only flight attendant assigned to first class, ma'am." "Then get someone from coach." That's not standard procedure. I don't care what's standard, I want someone else. James felt his jaw tighten, the muscle jumping in a way passengers couldn't see but he could feel, the physical manifestation of rage he wasn't allowed to express. 19 years. 19 years of perfect service, 3 commendations, 0 complaints, and this 24-year-old woman who'd never worked a day in her life was demanding his removal because he wouldn't adjust the thermostat. I'll speak to the chief flight attendant. Linda was in the coach galley when he found her, reviewing something on her phone with the concentration of someone avoiding eye contact with passengers. She looked up when he approached, and something in his face must have telegraphed the situation because her expression shifted to annoyance before he'd said a word. What? Passenger in 1A wants a different flight attendant. Linda's eyes narrowed. Did you do something? The question landed like a slap. Did you do something? Not what happened, not what's the situation, but the automatic assumption that if a passenger complained, the employee must have failed. I did my job. She wants someone else. Why? Because I'm black, and she's not used to black people telling her no. The answer sat on his tongue, bitter and true, but saying it out loud meant making it official, meant filing reports and starting processes that would consume hours and energy he didn't have. She didn't say. Linda's jaw worked. She glanced toward first class, then back at James, running her own calculation. Give her Michael. He's working 40 passengers in coach. Then you work coach. Michael does first. Linda, that's not... Don't argue with me. Switch sections, now. The unfairness of it crystallized in his chest, solid and cold. He'd done nothing wrong. Nothing except exist in a space where a wealthy passenger had decided his presence was unacceptable, and Linda's response was to reward that preference, to confirm that yes, James could be moved, could be made to disappear if the right person objected. No. Linda's eyes widened. In 22 years of working together across hundreds of flights, James had never refused a direct order. Excuse me? I said no. I'm assigned to first class. She doesn't get to demand a different flight attendant because she doesn't like me. James, don't do this. I'm doing my job, that's all. Linda's hand moved to her phone. James saw the motion, understood what it meant. She was texting someone, escalating this beyond the aircraft, pulling in management or corporate or whoever made decisions about flight attendants who stopped being compliant. He walked away before she could stop him, returned to first class, resumed his position in the galley. Michael appeared 90 seconds later, confusion written across his face. Linda just told me to switch with you. I know. James, what's happening? Nothing. Stay in coach. I've got this. Michael opened his mouth to argue, caught the look on James's face, and retreated. Smart kid. Knew when to pick battles and when to trust that someone else was fighting one worth losing over. The flight continued. James served drinks, collected trash, maintained his smile while his phone buzzed in his pocket with texts he didn't check because he knew they were from Linda and he knew what they'd say. Comply. Apologize. Make this easier. 37,000 feet over Illinois, the plane shuddered through a patch of turbulence. Light chop, nothing serious, but enough that the seatbelt sign dinged on and Captain Gonzalez's voice filled the cabin. Folks, we're hitting a little rough air. Flight attendants, please take your seats for a few minutes while we work through this. James headed for the jump seat. Ashley stood. Ma'am, please return to your seat. She kept walking toward the lavatory, phone in hand, the deliberate pace of someone who'd decided that rules applied to other people. Ma'am, the seatbelt sign is on. I can see the sign. For your safety, I need you to sit down until... Or what? You'll have me arrested? She laughed. The sound carried through first class, sharp and performative, designed to let everyone know she found the entire situation amusing. James felt something shift in his chest. Not anger exactly, something colder. The quiet rage that comes from being laughed at by someone who's never faced consequences, who's learned that mockery is a weapon she can wield without fear of retaliation. FAA regulation requires all passengers to be seated during turbulence. Please return to your seat. Ashley stepped closer. 6 inches separated them now, close enough that he could smell her perfume, expensive and heavy, close enough that backing away would look like retreat. "Who do you think you are?" The question hung between them, rhetorical but waiting for answer, daring him to claim any authority in a space where they both knew the power dynamics. "I'm the flight attendant responsible for your safety. People like you think you can tell people like me what to do just because you have a little uniform and some fake authority." The cabin went silent. Not the polite silence of people pretending not to notice, but the sharp vacuum that follows words that can't be unsaid, that reveal too much, that make explicit what everyone had been dancing around. Kenneth Jackson's coffee cup froze halfway to his mouth. Judge Anderson's pen stopped moving. Christopher Lee's hand shifted to his phone, subtle movement in his lap, screen angling up. James kept his voice level, quiet, measured in a way that took every ounce of control he possessed. "Ma'am, sit down. Make me. I don't need to make you. You're going to sit down because it's federal law." "You know what? I don't think so." She turned toward the lavatory. James moved to block her path, not touching, just positioning his body between her and her destination. Standard protocol for enforcing safety regulations. Ashley grabbed the champagne glass from her tray table. 3/4 full, Dom Perignon at 45 degrees. She swung her arm in a deliberate arc and threw the contents directly at his face. The liquid hit cold and shocking, champagne and water mixing as they soaked through his shirt, his vest, his tie. It dripped from his chin, ran down his collar, the sensation both physical and symbolic, the wetness mapping exactly how much dignity could be stripped in a single gesture. He didn't move, didn't wipe his face, just stood there, liquid dripping, while his brain processed what had just happened and his body fought the urge to respond in kind. "Oops." Ashley's voice carried artificial surprise, the performance of accident layered over deliberate assault. James found his voice somewhere beneath the shock. "You just assaulted a crew member. I spilled a drink. Accident. You threw it at me. Prove it. 40 people just watched you. 40 people saw me accidentally spill a drink on a flight attendant who was harassing me." The rewrite happened in real time, the narrative shifting beneath his feet. He'd seen this before in smaller forms, passengers who bumped into crew and blamed the crew for being in the way, who made demands and then complained about the quality of service when those demands were met. But this was different. This was deliberate reconstruction of reality, while the reality was still wet on his shirt. "I was enforcing FAA regulations. You were refusing to comply." Ashley shoved him, both hands to his chest, force behind it, his shoulder blades hitting the galley wall hard enough that pain radiated down his spine. "Did everyone see that? He just grabbed me. He touched me." James stood frozen, hand pressed to his shoulder where it had impacted the wall, his mind racing to catalog what had happened and what was being claimed, the gap between truth and accusation widening with every second. "I did not touch you." Captain Miller stood from 2C, 62 years old, silver hair perfectly combed, pot-belly straining against his belt, the authority of 35 years of flying written into his posture. "That's enough. Captain, I saw the whole thing, Thomas. You provoked her." The words landed like physical blows. James stared at Miller, trying to process how a check captain could have witnessed the same events and arrived at the opposite conclusion. "I did not. I'm check captain on this aircraft. You return to the galley now. I'm calling ahead to LAX. You're done." "Captain Miller, she threw a glass at me. I saw you aggressive toward a passenger. That's what I'm reporting." Linda appeared from coach, her timing too perfect to be coincidence, meaning she'd been hovering nearby, waiting to see how this played out. "James, go to the back galley." "Linda, I didn't do anything." "Go." James looked around the cabin. 40 faces in various states of shock, discomfort, guilt. Some wouldn't meet his eyes. Some looked away deliberately. Some, Judge Anderson, the Jacksons, Christopher Lee, stared back with expressions that suggested they'd seen something different from what Miller claimed. Judge Anderson gave a slight nod. "I saw it." Christopher Lee held up his phone just enough. "I recorded it." James walked to the back galley where Michael waited, his face stricken. "What happened?" "She threw champagne at me, then shoved me. Miller's reporting me for assault." "That's insane." "Is it?" Michael didn't answer. They both knew it wasn't insane, not in a world where power determined whose version of events became official record. The galley smelled like reheated pasta and coffee grounds. James's shirt was still damp, cooling against his skin, the physical discomfort minor compared to the humiliation of being exiled to the back of his own aircraft while a passenger who'd assaulted him remained in first class, probably ordering another champagne. Captain Miller's voice came over the intercom, speaking to LAX operations in the clipped professional tone that suggested he was reporting a routine issue rather than destroying someone's career. "LAX operations. This is Atlantic 227. Check Captain Miller. I need to report a disturbance. Flight attendant James Thomas has been aggressive with a VIP passenger, requesting security meet aircraft on arrival. Thomas is to be detained for questioning." The words filtered through the cabin speaker system, loud enough that passengers in coach could hear, could start forming their own conclusions about what had happened based on the sanitized corporate language of disturbance and aggressive and detained. James pulled out his phone. 3 texts from Linda, the progression clear. "Switch sections now. This is a direct order. You're being written up for insubordination." 1 text from Michael. "I'm so sorry." And 1 text from a number he didn't recognize. "I filmed everything. Christopher Lee, 1B. I'm a journalist. This isn't right." He stared at that last message, the offer of alliance from a stranger, wondering if documentation would matter when the official report came from a check captain with 35 years of credibility versus a flight attendant who'd just been accused of assault. His phone buzzed again. Different number. Unknown. "Daddy, something happened on the flight." The text was visible for 3 seconds before it disappeared. A misdirected message or a screenshot, he couldn't tell, but the tone was unmistakable. Ashley was calling her father, spinning whatever version of events would get her the response she wanted. Another buzz. Linda again. "CEO Davis has been informed. You're terminated effective immediately." The words blurred on the screen. Terminated. 19 years. 287,000 in retirement savings. Michelle's tuition due Friday. All of it evaporating because a 24-year-old woman had decided he didn't deserve respect. Michael appeared in the galley entrance. "They can't do this. You have union protection." "Union protection takes weeks. They're firing me now. Then we fight. I'll testify. The Jacksons will testify. That judge." "Michael." James looked at him, this young flight attendant who still believed the system protected people who were right. "Thank you, but I need you to go back to coach. Don't get caught up in this." "I'm already caught up in it. I saw what happened." "Then write it down. Time-stamp it. But stay out of Linda's line of fire." Michael hesitated, caught between solidarity and self-preservation, the eternal dilemma of witnesses who had their own livelihoods to protect. "I'm sorry." "I know." The plane began its descent over California, the seatbelt sign chiming on, James's phone buzzing with texts he stopped reading because there was nothing he could do at 35,000 feet except wait for landing and whatever came after. Somewhere in first class, Ashley Rodriguez was on her phone again, probably telling her father how a flight attendant had harassed her, had gotten physical, had made her feel unsafe. The story would reach Robert Williams, billionaire CEO, who would call Joseph Davis, Atlantic Airways CEO, who would make sure the problem was solved before the plane touched ground, the problem being James, being his job, being 19 years of his life that could be erased with a phone call from someone whose daughter had learned that throwing champagne was consequence-free if your father had enough money. The California coast appeared through the window, brown hills and blue ocean, LAX sprawling in the distance, runways like gray ribbons laid across the basin. James watched the city approach and thought about his father, about William Thomas, who'd founded an airline because the world wouldn't let him fly for anyone else, who'd believed that ownership meant safety from the systems designed to keep you grounded. His father had been wrong. Money didn't protect you. Power didn't protect you. Not when the power was incomplete, not when you kept it secret, not when you tried to earn respect through work instead of demanding it through wealth. The wheels touched down at 1:47 p.m. Pacific Time. The landing was smooth. The passengers applauded, that strange ritual of celebrating pilots for performing the basic function of their job. James didn't applaud. He stood in the back galley and waited for what came next. The plane taxied to the gate. Through the windows, James could see them waiting. 3 security vehicles, lights off but unmistakable, parked in positions that suggested they'd been there for a while, waiting for this specific aircraft, this specific problem. The parking brake engaged. Seatbelt sign off. Passengers standing, gathering bags, the usual organized chaos of deplaning. Nobody looked toward the back galley. Nobody wanted to make eye contact with the flight attendant who'd been accused, who'd been exiled, who was about to be removed. Officer Gary Thompson boarded first. 35 years old, white, airport security badge 4187, the practiced authority of someone who'd done this 100 times. 3 other officers followed, their presence turning the jetway into a corridor with only one exit. "James Thomas?" James stepped forward, hands at his sides, visible and empty. "I'm James Thomas. You need to come with us." "What's the charge?" "Assault of a passenger." "I didn't assault anyone. She assaulted me." Gary's expression suggested he'd heard this defense before and found it unpersuasive. "Sir, we have a report from the captain. The captain is wrong. Sir, don't make this difficult. I'm not resisting, but I have the right to know what I'm being charged with. Turn around, hands behind your back." The command landed in James's stomach like ice water. This was happening. This was actually happening. "I haven't been charged with anything." Gary pulled handcuffs from his belt, the metal catching fluorescent light. "Turn around now." James slowly turned around, the motion feeling both cooperative and like surrender, the kind of compliance that comes from knowing resistance would make everything worse. The handcuffs clicked around his wrists. Tight. Too tight. Metal biting into skin, circulation cutting off, his fingers going numb almost immediately. "Those are too tight." "They're fine." "I can't feel my fingers." Gary ignored him, grabbing his arm with more force than necessary. "Let's go." They started moving. Gary pulled him forward, the pace too fast for James to maintain balance in handcuffs, his body stumbling, trying to keep up. As they passed through first class, James's head hit the overhead bin edge. Gary yanking him through the narrow aisle without adjusting for the handcuffs, for the inability to raise arms to protect himself. Pain exploded across his temple. Sharp and immediate, the kind that comes with impact to bone. He felt wetness before he processed what it meant. Blood, running down his cheek, warm against cold skin. Brenda Jackson gasped. "Oh my God." Kenneth stood. "He's bleeding." Gary didn't stop. "Keep moving. I need medical attention. You'll get checked out at the station." The passengers had their phones out now. James saw them in his peripheral vision, screens angled, recording, the modern reflex to document rather than intervene. 8 different phones. Maybe more. The coverage would be comprehensive. Christopher Lee's voice, quiet but clear enough to be picked up by his recording. March 15th, 1:54 p.m. Atlantic Airways employee James Thomas is being dragged off aircraft, bleeding from head wound, in handcuffs, for the alleged crime of enforcing FAA safety regulations. The walk down the aisle felt infinite. Blood dripping, passengers staring, the physical pain competing with the humiliation of being perp-walked through his own workplace while people filmed his destruction. Ashley sat in 1A, watching. A small smile flickered across her face, quick and satisfied, gone before anyone could capture it on camera, but there long enough for James to see. He looked at her directly, voice steady despite everything. "I didn't touch you," Ashley addressed Stephen, loud enough for James to hear. "See? Still threatening me." The officers pulled him off the aircraft, down the jetway, through the terminal. 200 witnesses. More phones. The performance of law enforcement, the optics of safety, the spectacle of a black man in handcuffs being paraded past travelers who would tell the story later. Did you see that flight attendant getting arrested? Without context, without understanding, with only the visual of guilt that handcuffs provided. Christopher Lee's video uploaded before they reached the security office. The timestamp read 1:57 p.m. The caption, "Black Atlantic Airways employee arrested on his own flight after white passenger assaulted him." Within 60 seconds, 3,000 people had seen it. The number kept climbing. What none of them knew, not Gary Thompson, not Captain Miller, not CEO Joseph Davis, was that the man in handcuffs owned more of Atlantic Airways than any of them would earn in 5 lifetimes. That his father had founded the airline they worked for. That in exactly 8 minutes, James Thomas would make a phone call that would ground every Atlantic aircraft in North America. But right now, bleeding and handcuffed in an airport security office, James was just another black man being told his version of events didn't matter, and he was about to show them exactly how wrong they were. The holding room smelled like disinfectant and stale coffee. Concrete floor, metal table, 2 chairs bolted to the ground, fluorescent lights humming with the frequency that gave people headaches after 20 minutes. No windows, no clock. Just the two-way mirror reflecting James's face back at him, blood dried on his temple, shirt still damp from champagne, handcuffs catching light every time he shifted his weight. Officer Gary Thompson sat across from him, filling out paperwork with the methodical boredom of someone who'd processed 100 arrests and would process 100 more. He hadn't looked at James in 3 minutes. "I need to make a phone call." Gary kept writing. "After processing." "It's my constitutional right." "After processing." "How long is processing?" "As long as it takes." James felt the handcuffs bite deeper into his wrists. His fingers had gone from numb to tingling, that particular sensation that meant nerve compression, that meant damage if it continued much longer. "I need medical attention for my head." Gary glanced up, his eyes tracking to the dried blood, then back to his form. "Looks fine. I'm bleeding." It stopped. "The cuffs are cutting off circulation. I have nerve damage in my wrists." Gary set down his pen with exaggerated patience. "You want to file a complaint?" "Yes." "Good luck with that." They stared at each other across the metal table. James cataloged everything. The officer's badge number visible on his chest, the timestamp on the wall clock he could see through the door's small window showing 2:09 p.m., the particular expression on Gary's face that said he'd made assumptions about guilt the moment he saw a black man in handcuffs, and nothing James said would alter that calculus. "You assaulted a passenger." "No, I didn't." "Captain says you did." "The captain is wrong. Captain's the authority on his aircraft." "Authority doesn't mean correct." Gary leaned back, the chair creaking. "In my experience, guys like you always think." "Guys like me?" The words hung between them, invitation and challenge. Gary caught himself, recalibrated. "Guys who get arrested." "That's not what you were going to say?" Gary stood abruptly, the chair scraping concrete. "I'll be back. Don't move." "I'm handcuffed to a table." The door closed. Lock clicked. James was alone with his reflection, and the growing certainty that this situation was designed to break him down before anyone with actual authority showed up to make decisions. Standard interrogation technique: isolate, make them wait, let anxiety do the preliminary work. His phone was in the pocket of his vest, confiscated when they'd brought him in, sitting in a plastic tray somewhere beyond his reach. He thought about Michelle, probably in her anatomy midterm right now, filling in answers about vessels and tissues and systems she'd memorized through sleep deprivation and determination. She'd text him after like she always did, asking how his day went. He wondered what he'd tell her. The door opened. Different officer, older, female, name tag reading Karen Martinez, 50-something. The weathered competence of someone who'd seen enough to recognize when situations were more complicated than paperwork suggested. "Mr. Thomas, you have a right to one phone call. You want to make it now?" "Yes." "Local call only." "It's local." She uncuffed his right hand, the relief immediate and painful as blood rushed back into compressed tissue. She handed him a desk phone, the receiver heavy and outdated, the cord spiraling down to a base unit that probably hadn't been upgraded since the 90s. James dialed from memory. The number connected to a direct line that bypassed receptionists and assistants, the kind of access reserved for emergencies and shareholders who needed to reach decision-makers without delay. 3 rings. Someone picked up. "It's James Thomas, employee number 47,291. I'm being detained at LAX security office. I need you to execute emergency protocol 7. The voice on the other end was crisp, professional, female. Judith Chen, executive assistant to the board chairman, someone who'd worked for his father before the position transferred to Timothy Scott. "Mr. Thomas, are you certain?" "Yes, right now. Ground all Atlantic operations until this is resolved. Contact board chairman Timothy Scott. Have him call Daniel Martin at the Union. I'll be filing formal complaints against Captain Donald Miller, Chief Flight Attendant Linda Garcia, and CEO Joseph Davis within the hour." A pause. The sound of typing, rapid and efficient. "Sir, that will ground 147 aircraft." "I know what it will ground. I own 18% of the company. I'm invoking Article 12, Section 4 of the Corporate Charter, Emergency Shareholder Action. Do it now." "Understood. Executing protocol." The line went dead. James handed the phone back to Karen Martinez, who'd been watching with increasing confusion. "Who was that?" "My lawyer." "What did you mean you own 18%? "You'll find out." Gary Thompson reappeared in the doorway, his expression suggesting he'd been briefed on the phone call but not its content. "Find out what?" James looked at his watch. 2:11 p.m. Pacific. "In about 6 minutes. The officers exchanged glances. Karen cuffed his hand back to the table, gentler than Gary had been, and they both left. The lock clicked again. James sat in the silence and counted seconds, his mind running through the cascade of events that would be unfolding across the country right now. Judith calling Timothy Scott. Timothy pulling up Article 12, Section 4, the emergency provision William Thomas had written into the corporate charter in 1968 when 3 black pilots had decided that ownership was the only protection against an industry designed to keep them powerless. The article was clear. Any board member or major shareholder who alleged safety violations or corporate malfeasance could halt operations pending investigation. The threshold was high, required 18% or more of voting shares, but James had exactly 18%. Timothy would verify the shareholding records, would confirm James's identity, would make the call to FAA operations, would issue the emergency grounding order that would ripple through air traffic control centers from coast to coast, pulling Atlantic aircraft out of the sky like fish from water. His phone, still in that plastic tray somewhere, would be exploding with texts. Linda panicking. Joseph Davis realizing he'd just fired a major shareholder. Captain Miller, understanding that his report had triggered something larger than he'd anticipated. And somewhere in first class, probably still waiting for her bags, Ashley Rodriguez would be calling her father to spin her version of events, unaware that the man she'd assaulted owned more of the airline than her father would ever invest. 2:14 p.m., 3 minutes since the call. The door burst open. Karen Martinez again, but her energy had shifted, the casual authority replaced with something sharper. "Mr. Thomas, there's been a development. You need to come with me." "Am I being charged?" "No, you're being released." Gary appeared behind her, his face showing the particular confusion of someone whose understanding of a situation had just inverted. "Ma'am, the captain's report is being reviewed. Uncuff him." Gary moved forward reluctantly, his hands fumbling with the key, the handcuffs finally releasing with a click that felt more like defeat than freedom. James rubbed his wrists, red marks already darkening to bruises, circulation returning with pins and needles that made him wince. What changed? Karen looked at him with new assessment. Your lawyer called the board chairman. The board chairman called our director. Our director called me. You're free to go. That's not what I asked. She studied him, the calculation visible. You really own part of this airline? 18%. Gary's face went pale. Actually pale, the color draining in real time as he processed what he'd just arrested, who he'd handcuffed, whose head he'd let hit an overhead bin hard enough to draw blood. Karen's expression was more controlled but equally recalibrating. There are people waiting for you, board chairman and your union representative. James stood. His knees protested. He'd been sitting in stress position for 43 minutes, his body compressed and tense, adrenaline finally draining and leaving exhaustion in its wake. I need the security footage from this room, all 43 minutes. I'll make sure it's preserved. I need it now. Copied to my lawyer's office within the hour. Karen nodded. Consider it done. James walked past Gary Thompson, close enough to smell the officer's nervous sweat, close enough to see the moment Gary realized his career had just taken a very bad turn. You should probably call your union rep too. The corridor outside was different from when he'd entered. Before, it had been empty except for the officers escorting him. Now there were people. Atlantic Airways executives in suits, airport operations staff hovering at a distance, the nervous energy of a situation spiraling beyond anyone's control. Daniel Martin stood near the end of the corridor, 55 years old, black, gray threading through his hair, sharp suit that announced competence before he spoke. Union president for Atlantic Airways crew members, but also a practicing attorney, the kind of dual expertise that made him invaluable when situations crossed from labor dispute to legal crisis. Next to him was Timothy Scott, 60 years old, white, silver hair perfectly styled, board chairman of Atlantic Airways, and the man who'd taken over leadership after William Thomas died. Timothy's face showed controlled panic, the expression of someone managing a catastrophe while pretending to be calm. Daniel reached James first. You okay? James touched his temple where dried blood pulled at skin. I need a minute. You need a hospital. That's a head injury. I need to know what's happening. Timothy stepped forward, his voice low and urgent. Mr. Thomas, on behalf of the board, I deeply apologize. Save it. We'll talk tomorrow at the meeting. Of course. Is there anything you need right now? James felt the weight of 19 years compress into this moment. Every time he'd been passed over, every microaggression he'd swallowed, every passenger who'd treated him like furniture, every decision to stay quiet because speaking up would cost more than silence was worth. Yes, I need Captain Donald Miller's pilot license suspended immediately pending investigation. I need Linda Garcia removed from all flights, and I need security footage from this office for the last 43 minutes. Timothy pulled out his phone. Done. I'll make the calls right now. Good. And Timothy, tell Joseph Davis I want his resignation on my desk by tomorrow morning. Mr. Thomas, the CEO serves at the pleasure of the board. I'm calling an emergency board meeting. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. Joseph Davis will be answering questions about why he terminated a shareholder without investigation. He can resign now or be fired then. His choice. Timothy's throat worked. I'll convey the message. Daniel guided James away from Timothy, down the corridor toward the terminal proper, his hand on James's elbow, both support and steering. How much pain are you in? Head hurts, wrists are numb. I'll survive. That's not the question. How much pain? James stopped walking. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving clarity that felt almost hallucinogenic. Daniel, she threw champagne in my face. Then she shoved me into a wall, and Captain Miller had me arrested for it. I was bleeding and handcuffed on my own aircraft. I know, I saw the video. What video? Christopher Lee, journalist in seat 1B. He filmed everything, posted it 20 minutes ago. It's already at 500,000 views. The number landed wrong in James's brain. 500,000. People he'd never meet watching the worst moment of his professional life, watching him get assaulted and arrested, watching proof that would either vindicate or destroy him depending on who controlled the narrative. What's it show? Exactly what you just described. Ashley Rodriguez throwing champagne, shoving you, you never touching her. Miller standing up and taking her side, the whole thing. Something loosened in James's chest. Relief mixed with vindication, mixed with the bitter knowledge that even with video evidence, even with witnesses, even with Christopher Lee's documentation, the initial instinct had been to believe the white woman over the black flight attendant. The video didn't prevent his arrest. It only made the arrest harder to justify after the fact. I want to see it. Daniel pulled out his phone, opened Twitter. The video was pinned at the top of Christopher Lee's feed, captioned, "Black Atlantic Airways employee arrested on his own flight after white passenger assaulted him." James watched himself on the small screen, watched Ashley's arm swing, champagne hitting his face, watched her shove him, his body hitting the galley wall, watched Miller stand up, watched Linda appear, watched his own exile to the back galley while Ashley remained in first class like nothing had happened. The video had 547,000 views, 8,000 shares. The comments were a war zone, half the people outraged on his behalf, half making excuses for Ashley, a vocal minority claiming the video was edited or staged, or that James must have done something off camera to deserve it. "This is going to get bigger." Daniel nodded. "It's already bigger. CNN picked it up. Bloomberg, Wall Street Journal has a reporter calling me every 10 minutes. What are they asking? Who you are, why Atlantic grounded their fleet, what Ashley's father does, whether this is racial." Daniel paused. "James, they're asking questions I haven't answered yet. I need to know what you want me to say." James thought about his father, about the photograph on the refrigerator, about 19 years of keeping secrets because he'd believed that invisibility was safer than exposure, that working quietly would eventually earn the respect that wealth alone couldn't buy. He'd been wrong. Invisibility hadn't protected him. It had made him vulnerable, made him expendable, made it possible for Joseph Davis to fire him with a text message because nobody knew that firing James Thomas meant firing a major shareholder. Tell them the truth. Which truth? All of it. That I'm William Thomas's son. That I own 18% of Atlantic Airways. That I've worked as a flight attendant for 19 years because I wanted to earn respect on merit. James looked at Daniel. Tell them that merit doesn't matter when the system is designed to erase you anyway. Daniel's expression shifted, something like pride moving across his face. That's going to be the headline. Good. Let it be the headline. They walked through the terminal toward the gates. Passengers stared, some recognizing James from the video that was apparently everywhere now, some just reacting to the blood on his face and the Atlantic Airways uniform. A few held up phones, adding to the documentation, the permanent record of this day spreading through social media like wildfire through dry brush. Gate 24 was still active. Flight 227's passengers long gone, but the aircraft still parked, cleaning crew visible through the windows. James stopped at the gate counter. The agent who'd been working when they boarded, Melissa Thompson, looked up and her face went through several expressions before settling on horrified recognition. "Mr. Thomas, I'm so sorry. I didn't know." "Where's Ashley Rodriguez?" "She left about 20 minutes ago. Baggage claim, I think." James pulled out his phone. Daniel had retrieved it from the security office along with his wallet and keys. 17 missed calls, 34 text messages. He ignored them all and opened the phone's camera, taking photos of the gate area, the aircraft, establishing his presence here post-arrest, creating his own documentation. Daniel watched without comment. Smart lawyer, knew the value of building a record. "I want to make a statement." "Here?" "Here, now, before anyone else controls the story." Daniel glanced around. The gate area was relatively empty, just scattered passengers waiting for later flights, but that would change fast once word got out. "You sure? We could schedule a press conference, do this properly." "Properly means letting PR people write scripts. I want people to hear it from me." Daniel hesitated, then pulled out his phone. "I'll record it. Post it to the union's account and your personal if you want." James straightened his vest, aware of how he looked. Blood on his face, champagne stains on his shirt, exhaustion written into every line of his body. "Good. Let them see what happened. Let them see the cost of standing up when the system wanted you to stay down." Daniel hit record. "My name is James Thomas, employee number 47,291. I've been a flight attendant for Atlantic Airways for 19 years. His voice was steady. He'd found the same tone he used for safety demonstrations, the practiced authority of someone who'd spoken to passengers thousands of times. 2 hours ago, I was arrested on my own aircraft, in front of 40 passengers, while bleeding, in handcuffs. My crime? Enforcing FAA safety regulations." He paused, let the words settle. "What really happened? A passenger threw champagne in my face, then shoved me into a wall. When I asked her to follow federal law, the captain had me arrested." A passenger walking by stopped, then another. Phones came out. Not just Daniel's official recording now, but half a dozen spontaneous witnesses, the modern chorus documenting in real time. "Some of you know me as a flight attendant. What you don't know is that my father was Captain William Thomas, one of 3 black pilots who founded Atlantic Airways in 1968. When he died in 2015, he left me 18% of this company." Murmurs from the growing crowd. Someone gasped. The revelation landed exactly as he'd intended. Shock, disbelief, the narrative inverting in real time. "I could have cashed out. Could have never worked a day in my life. But my father taught me something. Dignity comes from work, not wealth. Respect is earned, not inherited." He felt the truth of those words even as he spoke them, felt the way they'd guided 19 years of choices that had led him to this moment. "For 19 years I put on this uniform. I served passengers. I followed every rule. I did my job with pride. And today I was treated like a criminal because I refused to let a wealthy passenger endanger herself and others." His voice hardened. "This isn't just about me. This is about every employee of color in this industry who's been passed over, every flight attendant who's been harassed, every worker who's been told to smile while being abused. It ends today." The crowd had grown to maybe 30 people now, the airport's natural traffic pattern funneling travelers past this gate at the exact moment James was rewriting the story. "Effective immediately, I am calling for the resignation of CEO Joseph Davis, who ordered my termination without investigation. I am calling for the suspension of Captain Donald Miller, who filed a false report. I am calling for the termination of Chief Flight Attendant Linda Garcia, who enabled passenger abuse of crew members." He paused, making sure the camera caught his eyes. "And I am calling for a full independent investigation into discrimination practices at Atlantic Airways going back 10 years. The fleet is grounded until these things happen. I don't care if it costs $14 million a day." Someone in the crowd yelled, "Hell yes!" Others applauded. The energy was shifting, the narrative solidifying around him instead of against him. Because some things are worth more than money. Dignity, justice, truth. "Thank you." Daniel stopped recording. The crowd didn't disperse immediately. Several people approached, wanting to shake James's hand, to express support, to share their own stories of workplace discrimination and casual cruelty. An older black woman with a TSA uniform hugged him, tears in her eyes. "Thank you for saying it. Thank you for standing up." A white businessman in his 50s handed James his card. "I'm an employment attorney. If you need additional representation, call me. No charge." James took the card, pocketed it, accepted handshakes and support while his head throbbed and his wrists ached and exhaustion pulled at him like gravity. Daniel eventually extracted him from the crowd, guiding him toward the terminal exit where daylight filtered through tall windows. That was either brilliant or career suicide. James almost laughed. Daniel, they already fired me. What career am I supposed to be worried about? Fair point. Where do you want to go? Hospital, then home. Then I need to call my daughter before she sees this on the news. I'll drive you. They walked through the terminal, Daniel making phone calls to arrange the board meeting while James focused on putting one foot in front of the other, his body running on fumes and principle. Gate agents stared as they passed. Some pointed. One started clapping, then others joined, scattered applause following them through Terminal 4 like a wave building momentum. The recognition was surreal. He'd worked at this airport for 19 years in practical invisibility, just another flight attendant in a Navy vest, part of the scenery passengers looked through rather than at. Now people were recording him on their phones, posting to Instagram and TikTok, turning him into something he'd never intended to be, a symbol, a headline, a story bigger than his own life. Daniel's car was in employee parking, a sensible Toyota that reflected his personality, practical, reliable, nothing flashy. James collapsed into the passenger seat, his body finally allowed to acknowledge how much it hurt. The head wound was pulsing in time with his heartbeat. His wrists were swollen. His shoulder blade felt bruised from hitting the galley wall. Nearest emergency room? There's a UCLA clinic 10 minutes from here. They'll see you faster than a full ER. Daniel drove in silence for the first few minutes, navigating LAX traffic with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done this route 1,000 times. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful. You know, this is just the beginning. I know. Atlantic's legal team is going to come after you. Ashley's father is going to come after you. This is going to get ugly before it gets better. James stared out the window at Los Angeles flowing past, palm trees and strip malls and billboard lawyers promising justice for accident victims. It was already ugly, Daniel. I just made it visible. That's a good line. Use that when reporters call. How many reporters are calling? Daniel's phone buzzed in the cup holder between them. He glanced at the screen. 17 media requests in the last hour. CNN, MSNBC, Fox, every major newspaper, 3 podcast networks, and something called the Daily Labor Report, which I've never heard of. What are they asking? Everything. Your background, Ashley's identity, Robert Williams' connection, whether you're planning to sue, whether this is part of a larger labor action. Daniel paused. James, this is going to consume your life for the next few months. Every decision you make will be scrutinized, every word analyzed. Are you ready for that? The question deserved consideration. James had spent 19 years avoiding scrutiny, keeping his head down, maintaining the invisibility that let him move through the world without constant friction. Going public meant surrendering that protection, meant accepting that strangers would have opinions about him, that his face would be attached to debates he'd never wanted to have. But staying quiet had led him here, handcuffed and bleeding because a passenger had decided his dignity was negotiable. Silence hadn't protected him. It had made him vulnerable. I don't know if I'm ready, but I'm doing it anyway. The clinic was tucked into a medical plaza off Sepulveda, the kind of facility that served as middle ground between emergency room and urgent care. Daniel parked and they walked in together, James's uniform drawing immediate attention from the nurse at intake. I need to be seen for a head injury and possible nerve damage in my wrists. The nurse took one look at the dried blood and the bruising on his wrists and bypassed the usual intake process. Come with me. The examination room was sterile and fluorescent. The doctor, a young South Asian woman who introduced herself as Dr. Patel, and proceeded to conduct the most thorough physical exam James had received in years. She cleaned the head wound, required 3 butterfly closures to keep it from reopening, and ordered x-rays for his wrists, even though he insisted they just hurt. Humor me. I want to rule out fractures. The x-rays came back negative for breaks, but showed soft tissue swelling consistent with handcuff compression. Dr. Patel prescribed anti-inflammatories and wrote a detailed report documenting all injuries, their probable causes, and recommended follow-up. This is assault. You should file a police report. Already documented. But thank you. She handed him the report. her eyes serious. "I saw the video. What happened to you was wrong." James took the report, another piece of documentation for the growing file. "Thank you." By the time they left the clinic, it was past 5 p.m. Pacific, which meant past 8 in New York, which meant Michelle had definitely finished her midterm and would have seen the news. James pulled out his phone as Daniel drove, scrolling through texts until he found hers. 23 messages. The progression told the story. Initial confusion. "Dad, is this you on Twitter?" Mounting alarm. "Dad, call me now." Eventual panic. "Please tell me you're okay, I'm freaking out." He called. She picked up before the first ring finished. "Dad? Dad?" "I'm okay, baby." "Hey, you're okay? You're okay? Dad, you were arrested. I saw the video. There's blood." "I'm fine, I'm out. I'm with Daniel. We're heading home." "What happened? The news is saying you own the airline? That you grounded all the planes?" James closed his eyes, leaned his head against the car window. "It's complicated. Uncomplicated." So he did. Told her everything. The champagne, the shove, the arrest, the phone call, the emergency protocol. Told her about the 18% he'd kept secret, about her grandfather's legacy, about 19 years of trying to earn respect through work instead of demanding it through wealth. Michelle was quiet when he finished. The silence stretched long enough that James checked his phone to make sure the call hadn't dropped. "Michelle? I'm here. I'm just—" Her voice cracked. "I'm so angry, Dad. I'm so angry I could scream." "I know." "No, you don't. Because you're always so calm about this stuff. You always just take it and move on and you never fight back, and I've watched it my whole life and I—" She stopped, breathing hard. "I'm glad you fought back this time." James felt something loosen in his chest. "Me too. What happens now?" "Board meeting tomorrow. Then probably legal proceedings. Then I don't know." "Do you still have a job?" The question landed in a complicated space. Technically, he'd been fired. Technically, he could probably demand reinstatement. Technically, he owned enough of the company to make himself CEO if he wanted. "I don't know yet. We'll figure it out." "Dad, I can defer tuition if you need—" "No. I've got your tuition. That account is separate and protected." "But if they fired you—" "Michelle, I own 18% of a company worth about $2 billion. Your tuition is covered." Silence again. Then, "Holy shit." Language. "Dad, you're a billionaire. On paper. It's complicated. And I'm not changing my life. I'm still your dad. Or, I still work for a living. Money doesn't change that." "But it could. You could retire. You could—" "I could do a lot of things. Right now, I'm going to go home, sleep, and show up to a board meeting tomorrow where I'm going to make sure the people who did this face consequences. After that, we'll see." Michelle was quiet again, and when she spoke her voice was softer. "I'm proud of you." The words hit harder than they should have. James pressed his free hand against his eyes, fighting the sudden pressure behind them. "Thank you, baby." "Call me tomorrow after the meeting?" "I will. Go study. You have another test this week." "Dad, I can't study. I'm watching you become a viral news story in real time." "Michelle, I love you. Be safe. And Dad, burn it all down." She hung up before he could respond. James sat with the phone in his lap, his daughter's blessing ringing in his ears. Daniel glanced over. "She okay?" "She told me to burn it all down." "Smart kid. You raised her right." Daniel navigated onto the freeway, heading east toward downtown. "Speaking of burning things down, you need to prepare for tomorrow. The board is going to push back. Joseph Davis isn't going down without a fight." "Let him fight. I've got Article 12, Section 4. I've got video evidence. I've got witness statements. You've also got a very angry billionaire whose daughter you just made infamous." James had been trying not to think about Robert Williams, about the kind of man who'd threatened to pull $340 million in investment because his daughter wanted a different flight attendant, about the resources available to someone who measured wealth in billions and power in board seats and influence in phone calls that made CEOs jump. What's he going to do? Legally? Probably nothing. The video makes Ashley's liability too clear. But Robert Williams doesn't just operate legally. He'll come at your reputation, dig into your past, find anything that makes you look bad, and amplify it. My past is 19 years of perfect service. Everyone has something. A bad relationship, a financial mistake, a comment taken out of context. He'll find it and weaponize it. James thought about his life, cataloging vulnerabilities. His father's death and the inheritance. Michelle's mother, his late wife Angela, who died of cancer when Michelle was 4, leaving him a single parent at 26. The years of struggling to pay rent and child care while working entry-level flight attendant wages before the death benefit and life insurance had eased the pressure. Nothing scandalous, nothing secret, just the ordinary difficulties of an ordinary life documented in tax returns and medical bills and the slow accumulation of stability. Let him dig. He won't find anything. James, I've done this for 30 years. There's always something. Then we'll deal with it when it comes. Daniel's phone buzzed again. He glanced at it, frowned, pulled over to the shoulder to read properly. His expression darkened as he scrolled. What? Daniel handed him the phone. Email from Atlantic Airways General Counsel. Emergency board meeting scheduled, March 16th, 9 a.m. Agenda items include review of shareholder action, discussion of CEO performance, investigation into Flight 227 incident, and consideration of Mr. James Thomas's ongoing employment status. They're putting my employment up for debate? They're trying to regain control of the narrative, make it look like they're the ones investigating you instead of the other way around. James read the email again. The language was careful, neutral, designed to sound reasonable while obscuring the power dynamics at play. Can they terminate a shareholder? They can't terminate your shares, but they can terminate your employment if they claim just cause, and then you'd be a shareholder who doesn't work for the company anymore. What's their argument for just cause? Probably that you violated procedure by grounding the fleet without consulting the full board first, that you acted unilaterally in a way that cost the company millions. Article 12 gives me that right. Article 12 was written in 1968 by 3 black pilots who were terrified of being pushed out of their own company. Most of the current board members probably don't even know it exists. Daniel pulled back onto the freeway. They're going to argue it's outdated, that it was never meant to be used this way, that your father wouldn't have wanted you to hold the company hostage. My father wrote that article specifically so that people like me couldn't be pushed out. This is exactly what he wanted it for. I know that. You know that. Tomorrow you're going to have to convince 12 board members, half of whom probably think you're the problem. James leaned back against the headrest, exhaustion pulling at him like undertow. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. 12 board members and whatever legal arsenal Atlantic's counsel could assemble overnight, against him and Daniel and the truth. The truth would have to be enough. Daniel dropped him at his Queens apartment just before midnight East Coast time, having driven straight from LAX to the airport for a red-eye back to New York. James climbed the 3 flights of stairs, each step an exercise in willpower, his body finally crashing after running on adrenaline for 14 hours. Mrs. Kowalski's door cracked open as he passed. "James, I saw the news." "I'm okay, Mrs. Kowalski. That girl who hurt you, she should be ashamed. She should be a lot of things. Good night." His apartment felt different when he unlocked the door. Same furniture, same layout, but the space had changed because he'd changed, because the person who'd left at 6 a.m. that morning to catch a flight to LAX wasn't the same person coming home at midnight. The photo on the refrigerator drew his attention. His father's face, young and proud, standing next to an equally young James in their matching uniforms. June 1995. 29 years ago. His father had been 47 then, roughly the same age James was now, already carrying the weight of building something that would outlast him. I did what you taught me, Dad. I stood up. The photo didn't answer. James stood there anyway, drawing strength from the memory, from the legacy, from the knowledge that his father had faced worse and survived, had built an airline from nothing because the alternative was accepting that the world would always tell him no. His phone buzzed. Daniel. Press conference scheduled for 10 a.m. tomorrow after the board meeting. Major networks confirmed. You ready? James typed back. As ready as I'm going to be. Another buzz. One more thing. Christopher Lee wants to interview you. Says he's been investigating airline discrimination for months, and your case connects to bigger patterns. Interested? James thought about the journalist in seat 1B who'd filmed everything, who'd posted the video that made this whole cascade possible, who'd apparently been working on a story about exactly the system James had just crashed into. Yes, after the press conference. He showered, the hot water turning rust-colored as it washed dried blood from his hair, changed into clean clothes, made himself eat something even though he wasn't hungry, protein bar and water, fuel for tomorrow. Set his alarm for 6 a.m. Lay down in bed and stared at the ceiling, too wired to sleep despite exhaustion. His mind kept replaying the day, Ashley's face when she threw the champagne, the cold shock of handcuffs. Gary Thompson's assumption of guilt. The moment he'd made the call and set everything in motion. Tomorrow would be harder. Tomorrow he'd face the board, face questions about his judgment, face people who'd known his father and would have opinions about whether James had honored or betrayed that legacy. But tonight, lying in his apartment with the city humming outside his window, James Thomas allowed himself to feel something he hadn't felt in 19 years. Hope. Not the passive hope of waiting for things to get better. The active hope of having fought back and survived. Of having made himself visible when visibility was the most dangerous thing he could do. Of having trusted that the truth, when documented and spoken clearly, had power even against billionaires and board members and the accumulated weight of systems designed to keep him quiet. He'd fought back, and tomorrow he'd finish what he'd started.